Hi, Tom.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
I'm going to change it to speaker view. There we go.
Good. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. It's nice to finally meet you.
Honestly, how did we meet?
Well, I know that I had seen you on YouTube a little while ago, and then I got an email from you recently.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah,
I'm
I think
not sure how you got my email, but I'm very happy about it.
then in that case, I've got your email because you're an affiliate for the National Aphasia Association.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been looking at that, trying to build up a database from that too. I'm on the board of the National Aphasia Association. So I've been studying and seeing how we can get more affiliates, and figured I would start my own database so I could start sending more people to more information about my work as well. So that's how I got to you.
Wonderful.
When did you even figure you would start to do all of this? You're an SLP, right? A clinician?
Yes. It was, I started volunteering for the, what's it called? The thing that Lingraphica and the Aphasia Recovery Connections group, they started the online, I'm blanking on what it was called now, but they did the daily Zoom call. So I have a group that I lead.
Cool.
Yeah, and when I first started with them, and I was just observing a few of the groups, one of the groups was about sharing. It was like a talent show or whatever. It was sharing, what your talents are, hobbies, things like that. And just hearing some of the people with aphasia talk about what they've learned to do again after having a stroke, I was like, oh my gosh, the world needs to know about these people.
That is true. That is true.
Because I work with so many stroke survivors who, right now I'm doing home health mostly. And so I see them when they come home, and, it's just kind of hitting them that life is different and gonna be different from now on. And so a lot of them are, going through the depression and just not knowing what the future looks like. And I wish, honestly, that something like this already existed, so I could show them, like, look at, all these people who were able to figure out somehow, some way to get back to doing what they love, or something new, and it's going to look different, but yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
That's my vision.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah. Well, you are my first stroke champion that I'm interviewing. So thank you for doing it with me.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll just get started. So welcome, Tom, and please introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Sure. A little bit about a long story, right? Everybody's got a long story. Everybody with stroke and aphasia have a long story, because you are before your stroke and then after your stroke and everything in between. But at least in my case, the short story of that longer story is that at the time I was an associate dean at the Heller School at Brandeis University, had the stroke on Main Street in Waltham, Massachusetts. And that was the last thing I remembered, or the last time I remembered was actually looking at my shoes. And then I woke up enough that I could remember in a chair at the CVS, in the, the pharmacy in the back of the CVS. They always have a pharmacy back there. So I was at that chair, and that's where I woke up. And my wife, we were walking, and when I had the stroke, she grabbed me and dragged me, turns out to be 310 feet, to get to those chairs in the back and called 911. And that's how it all really started.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. It really is.
Wow. And so when was this?
That was in September of 2011.
Okay.
And I was there for 5 years at the university. I got my PhD, research PhD, a year before I started working there. I'm late in life getting my work done, but getting my PhD done. And was there for those 5 years. After that, of course, I could not read, write, or speak well. I saw an SLP like yourself for 6 months, 30 sessions, but they were scattered among the months. And then I went to the group, aphasia group at Boston University Aphasia Resource Center in Boston. And I was there for 4 months. So, and I got about 22 hours of formal therapy from them. And after that, like so many of us, insurance runs out, as it is. After that, I had started doing what turned out to be highly therapeutic. I didn't know that what I was doing was therapeutic at all. It was just my habit and my thought. And I started a diary, which turned out to be a 500-page diary. My therapist didn't know, my wife didn't know, and I didn't know. It took 11 months when I came to the realization. I had another stroke of its own kind. I had another click in my head, and that's when I pointed at my first entries and realized just how bad they were. And I actually said, "Who wrote this?" Because clearly it was my own handwriting, but I didn't know that I had written that because it looked so bad. However, I also wrote using graphs and charts and metaphorical drawings that do make a lot of sense. So even if you, Heather, were to look at my diary, which you'll see a lot of them in book 1 of my books, you would actually see what I was thinking because you see my drawings. So you and other colleagues of yours, when you have lunch and you're talking about your clients and one says, "Well, what do you think Tom was thinking?" Well, that's what I was thinking. You'll look at the words below, they don't make any sense at all. But you'll look at the pictures and the metaphorical pictures and you go, "Oh, that's what Tom was, quote, thinking." Although, of course, I couldn't describe or explain what I would have normally been thinking if I was able to write it. So yeah, that was the beginning of me getting better because it is highly therapeutic in terms of the stimulant that induces plasticity. I recorded myself for 2 years with my phone. Again, nobody told me to do that. I do encourage SLPs to tell us to record our voice every day. There's all kinds of great reasons for doing that, including not even realizing that doing it doesn't mean that you necessarily are aware of what you're doing that's therapeutic. The day will come when you become more understanding about that. And in the meantime, if you do record it and provide that to others, you'll probably learn more about your awareness component sooner, because if you show or give it to the SLP and they can listen, they can say, "Oh, here, Tom, here's what you were trying to say." And at that point I would go, "Oh, really? I had no idea. I thought everything looked fine." So even short-circuiting some of this, if I had written my diary on day 1 and gave it to my SLP, she would have said, "Oh, Tom, this is terrible." I doubt you would actually use those words exactly, but you would otherwise say, "Good, this is wonderful. You're doing this. You can see some problems, or maybe you can't, but the fact that she's actually pointing them out would allow me to better understand the awareness component earlier because of what she would have done." And I did take hundreds of pictures of the world around me too, just because, and I had to walk because I had heart surgery 3 months before. That's probably how I got the stroke. And I was taking hundreds of pictures, again, trying to document who I was, basically, you know, reading, writing, pictures, documenting, keeping track, not realizing that all of those action verbs were highly therapeutic. And then as a result, I did get better based on those things, of course, with the start with my SLPs. But now I do highly recommend that the SLPs, and I think you've seen it in one of my more recent articles about the SLPs being the trim tabs, if you've read that book, that second phase is helping the people with aphasia begin to understand, even if you're not fully understanding, but that means helping us become more habit starting earlier, basically while we're still with you. Because without you, then we have nowhere to go. We have absolutely nothing, which is another reason why I wrote my fourth book, The ABCs of Aphasia, because most people like me, when I left the hospital, I didn't know anything about aphasia. When not that I was able, but my wife would go online and start looking at things. What's this thing called aphasia all about? But most people don't get anything in terms of anything that's tangible, which is why I wrote that book, The ABCs of Aphasia, for that very reason. Because again, there's an awful lot of work that goes into regaining your language. And it's measured really in years, but it's also measured in motivation and practice. And when you don't have an SLP anymore, the motivation and practice continues to be up to you. And the more you can actually adopt that or learn to understand it, or with the materials and or with the family after your 3, 4, 5, 6 days at the hospital, now waiting for rehab appointments, at least you can begin to understand that this is a habit you have to now do and continue to work hard, as it were. And work hard meaning it eventually makes it work easier too, to work on all of those activities that are highly therapeutic. So keep a diary, record your voice, listen to your voice, take the pictures around you, take pictures of the world around you. If you can't read them, because I couldn't, I would take pictures and bring them to my wife and say, what does this mean? And she would go, oh, this is what it means. I go, and they were easy words, but at least I came to understand that if I just keep doing these things, again, not knowing that they would be therapeutic, but because I was keeping track, trying to understand who I was, as it were, it turns out to be the way the brain works. I know. And I could go on and on and on with these long stories, but I'll stop here.
This is incredible. The fact that you, from the beginning, kept a diary, recorded yourself, took pictures, did drawings. I mean, what do you remember? So I know you said you didn't know how therapeutic that was at the time, but were you just needing to get it out, or what? I'm wondering what prompted you to start.
How did I get better? I know. And I do, you might have, well, I'd say you've heard of me before if you've watched some of my presentations. The whole thing is tremendously interesting for sure. It's not like I wanted to have my stroke, get aphasia, figured it out, got better, wrote about it, now explain to other people. It's not like I wanted all that to happen. However, I got better based on the habit who I was before my stroke. So I didn't know that it'd be therapeutic, but it was my habit to keep track of my life, to understand who I was on a, not necessarily day to day, but I tried to understand who I was going forward. But but not knowing that it was therapeutic is sort of like not knowing that you're learning. You just learn, you know, you don't have necessarily any conscious understanding that if I do these things, then I will learn something. If I don't do these things, I won't learn those things, which was sort of stupid if you were to think like that. I just learned. And yes, you practice. And again, it's a habit that goes back until it was my habit when I was a kid, you know. In fourth grade, I told my parents I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I want to go to sea. That's what I wanted to do. And I was in fourth grade. I remember that because my dad started writing it down, because he said, okay, you want to go to the Naval Academy? Here's what you have to do. You have to study hard. You have to learn math. You have to understand these things. And basically at fourth grade, I said, okay, I can do that. And I did that. And I went to the Naval Academy. So that's the beginning of how we are who we are today. It really is working backwards, step by step. You realize who, quote, you were long before you were aware. So even as a baby, right? Even as a toddler, even as now, who provided me then? The environment, right? Of the family, of the teachers, as I got old enough to go to school. And that too is a large part of how you become a person with aphasia who can get better. Part of that is understanding who you were before. And if that is part of the process, then helping the SLPs understand who I am is also part of that process. And that process was never done for me. I am sure I was asked, what did you used to do? I was a dean. Okay, that's enough for them. They kept on going. Did they ask if I was in the Navy or went to sea or did all these other things? No. Could I have explained them? No. But did I have a resume? Did we have some discussion? Even if I was pointing at things, what am I most interested in? Whatever those things are all part of understanding the keeping track history of the individual, me, such that the SLP can better understand from your perspective, their perspective, about what are the factors that allow me to get better, including the habit, which was huge in terms of the habit of fill in the blank, whatever it be, the challenges and the triumphs of whatever the habit had been adopted by. And of course, back then, I'd never read about William James either, so until after my stroke. So I never knew that habit is quite the lever of how the world moves. So again, it was only later that really led me. Again, this is this blanking spot here where I had the stroke, didn't understand anything. This is me and my world. Now I started going after my stroke. My own body and brain went back behind and started to study who I was. And I was writing in my diary because I thought, well, when did I first learn certain things? Even if I couldn't express it for you to see, I would write it down into the past. And I said to myself, well, when did I start learning these things? So I went back and thought my way through what all the jobs I'd ever done. And I wrote them down best I could. And then go back further and further and further. How is it that I became good at one thing or another? I don't know. Not realizing that now I've learned an awful lot now about the 10 principles of neuroplasticity, right? And you look at those 10 principles, you go, oh, so way back then in life, neither me nor my parents nor my mentors really, no, they don't even understand anything about plasticity and the rules and the principles. Humans just do those things, you know, and you create those things with the habits that you have, not yet realizing until later in life. This is why I work so hard to educate the wider public about plasticity, because then older adults and then younger adults can begin to understand sooner in life than waiting until you have a stroke, find out about aphasia and plasticity and go, oh, you mean that's how the brain works? Mm-hmm. That's how you repair yourself, using plasticity as the basis for all learning? Nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever will, until somebody like me comes after you and says, this is what you have to do. Not that you have to learn. What you have to do is understand how learning works. That's half the battle. That's half the battle. Nobody, as far as I can tell, nobody has talked to you and then talked to millions, which I would love to talk to millions about that exact thing.
So you tell us, because I agree. I believe neuroplasticity is, once somebody starts to understand that, it's empowering, realizing, oh, I can change my brain. I can continue to learn at any age, at any state. So how would you explain neuroplasticity to someone who has aphasia? Or someone who has never heard this word before, and you need to break it down to its simplest terms?
Sure. I'm just taking notes, as people with aphasia always do, as most people always do. But that's a good question of yours. Because in some ways, so we're having this conversation, you don't have aphasia, so you fully understand how normal people communicate. And I've gotten better enough so that we can have a good conversation. Now I talk to thousands of people with stroke and aphasia. We both realize, meaning me and everybody in the audience, knows who they are and where they fit into that continuum of deficits in various modalities, right? Some people couldn't do things that I couldn't do. I could write for beans, and many, but recently one said, oh yeah, he could write fine. He couldn't read or write. I mean, he couldn't speak well or hear well or speak well, but he could, he could read. I said, really, you could read? He said, never had any problem with reading. I said, huh, how do you like that? But in my audiences of thousands, I'm again beginning to realize the breadth of deficits and the way they are all so incredibly nested in different ways, that when I want to talk to them and help them better understand about aphasia and plasticity, I had to come up with a new common denominator that would work. People talk about common denominator. People talk about aphasia friendly, as if you could create very simple words and that would somehow help. Well, there's all kinds of reasons for or against using very, elementary school words or not. I know there's all kinds of issues about that. But one of the issues, this is really just, I digress, of that normal people who are X number of years old, they've used those words before. If now I'm using them again and they can't understand them or see them yet, that's A, that's okay. B, it's therapeutic to hear those words again because they knew them before. And the body and the brain assumes more of the cognitive load as a result of having to find in their brain the word they want to say because they knew it before. They could pronounce it before and they can't do it now. So they don't want to be told, well, don't use that word, Tom. I know you can. Well, no, I understand that word. I just can't grasp it yet. So don't tell me I don't know this. I do know this, but I do understand that I can't grasp it now. So that's I digress. But coming back to how do I do it now that everybody can use is with metaphors. You have seen, and I got a bunch of them with me from my recent 10 or 15 articles. Each one is written with a metaphorical twist to it all. And it centers on typically one image. So I started using that with my articles, and then I started converting, not really completely converting, because a lot of times I have been speaking to various groups and for their third, fourth, fifth time. So I've been using more and more scientifically based information because they've been with me for a long time. But now, because more people now call me that haven't seen me before, and I figured out, oh, I should really adopt what I'm writing so that they can better understand it through my articles. But they still have to have somebody else read it to them if they still can't read it yet. I have started using these PowerPoints with each page being one image, typically with very few words. I mean, like 2 or 3 or 4 words. But the metaphorical content of that then lets everybody see it as best they can from their own perspective, including the felt sense in their body. So when you think about, and I'll use this one example of homework. Homework is really much more than just, quote, homework. Because when I had my homework, I had my class with my SLP, and then I had homework. And often it was, oh, it's okay, it's sort of easy, you can do. That's a whole nother digression there. But I did my homework, and then that would be 15, 20 minutes, and then I would want more homework, right? I mean, you don't really understand that wanting more homework when you're a kid somehow is therapeutic. Somehow you learn more, but somehow you built that habit component is neurologically based, that I wanted more homework. So I just started doing more homework. But I wrote that article about homework is more than, quote, just homework. And the one image is those playground spinners where the kids jump on them and the other kids will push them and they start spinning around. I have some around here somewhere. And just doing this stuff. Well, so it's in here somewhere. Anyway, it spins and spins and spins, and the kids are there, right? And once they get them up to speed, then the others, they just push it once, and it keeps on going. Once, it keeps on going. With all the kids there, they're having a lot of fun, a lot of centrifugal motion. It's just a lot of fun. But the people that are directing and providing the impetus of that big spinner, once they have it up to speed, they don't have to do much. Vroom, vroom, vroom. And the same thing happens with plasticity. Repetition is huge, but it isn't enough to just get repeating a certain word every time and that's how it's going to work. No, there's any number of modalities. They all enter your body in different modalities. And it isn't like you have to repeat this or this. You just have to repeat, as it were, take the energy that says you should use all your modalities as much as you can, as best you can. Boof, boof. So homework, you don't have to, quote, do formal homework every night, but every day you have to be thinking, oh, now that I understand more about plasticity, I should go out and walk and take pictures and look at the world and understand various things, whether you necessarily understand them enough to express to others, but you can understand it as best you can on the inside. And the inside will eventually get back to the outside and remain more therapeutically internalized as well. So I use now these images, basically one image. Each one has a core, useful, forceful understanding about the various principles of plasticity without even using any of those words. When you look at some of these, and I look at them, and to myself, I say, wow, now I better understand how it works. So yes, that's how I'm trying to do now. So now I use a PowerPoint. If you want me to come make presentations there, it is called Metaphors Help Us Mend. And my 5th book is called Stroke and Aphasia Recovery. Metaphors Help Us Mend and Learn. And that book will come out by the end of this year.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. That's great. I think you're right. Metaphors, I mean, metaphors help everybody understand. Stories help everybody understands
Mhm.
that concept, how, no matter how difficult or big the concept is. So that's great. You found some good images and metaphors to help break down neuroplasticity. That's wonderful. I did want to ask, so you've talked about all the things that have helped you in your recovery and the different therapies that you had. And you also mentioned that you went to Boston University Aphasia Resources Center for additional therapy. How did you find out about that?
Oh, the group,
Yeah.
the SLP there, when we were coming to the end, she had said, well, after the individual, she said, there are groups in your area. She said, one is the Boston University group. And she gave me the number, I think a phone number, and called them and signed up for a class called Conversations.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And it was also the first time I went to my class in January of 2012. And for the first time, it was been now 5 months since my stroke, first time I met anybody else with stroke and aphasia. I showed up in that room. There were 12 of us all together. And I was the first one who the others had been with the groups before. It was my first time. And I told them all, basically, this is amazing that there's other people like us. And that's another thing I encourage people is bring in, even with your therapy, bring in others who are further on in their process. Ask one of the others, if you wouldn't mind, can you come and say hi and just introduce yourself? Because that would be very helpful. Not waiting for 5 months before you meet somebody else with the same who you are, others who are like you.
Right. That's wonderful. I definitely, when I work with stroke survivors, I've noticed that that's a very common feeling of I'm the only one, because that's the only one they see. They're not seeing other people. They've never met anybody else who has aphasia or apraxia or whatever they have. So that's good. So the other thing I wanted to ask was, so we went over all the things that were helpful for you. Was there anything that you did or any therapies that weren't helpful?
Well, it's interesting. If there were things that didn't help, it wasn't that I was aware that they didn't help, right? You know, everything that the SLP did for me was helpful. And I wasn't aware that there were other things that we should have been doing that would have been helpful if we had done more of that or some of that. Again, didn't know any of that. Now, I do say that another thing that needs to be done is to introduce to the patient about that journey that's going to start, not with you, with your 12 hours, 12 hours of sections, but what comes the day after. And what comes the day after? Because I remember we were done at 30 sessions, each was 30 minutes, so 15 hours. And literally at the end, it was like, okay, bye. You know, there was no plan. There was no, here's what you should do. She did give me the number to go to a group, but there was no, and again, this isn't like I thought it was bad, so I'm telling you it's bad. This isn't the case at all. This is me understanding now later that the earlier that we could be introduced by the SLP about this journey, that this, all of the work you've done before to bring you to who you are before your stroke, you have to use those same practices, activities, habits you have always done, and you have to do them later. So I have to tell you now, this is how you're going to get better. Remembering who you were, actuating who you had done before as best you can. And we have to do that now so that later when you leave, you have already started with that spinner, right? You've already started doing it, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And you have to tell me that now. Do not wait until it just doesn't happen. So yes, I do encourage that to happen now. But again, I think it's just more enhancing the habit, the practice that you guys already provide, such that we can better understand it earlier, even if I still can't understand, even if it was after ending formal therapy and I still wasn't, quote, good enough. At least we would have more materials, not unlike the ABCs of aphasia, that the family would have. And the more you, quote, read them, and I made sure that the ABCs starts with an image and then fairly succinct explanation, and then more explanations later in the book with a glossary and websites and links, so that as you get better day by day, you get to see more of what you see in any number of materials and modalities that are therapeutic.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion for us SLPs and other therapists to hear about. Once the patient is done with us, with the therapies with us, we need to provide a plan or let them know what to do next. I think that's
right.
important. Let's see. We went over a lot of the questions already. Here's one. What would you say to someone or someone's family who just had a stroke? What's something that you would say to them right now?
So the question is, what would I say to the person who just had stroke, like the day of? What would I suggest to them? We just moved to Maine recently. We've been in Florida for the last 8 years. And I ended up in Florida because of my stroke. So, and Maine is what's been our home. So, but in Florida, I was a volunteer at the local hospital and had started speaking a lot to the hospital staff over the years, and got to the point where they would call me if somebody in the hospital had a stroke, because it was a small town. They knew who to call me, and they would call me that day or the next day, and I'd go right to the hospital. So I got to see that person. Any number of people had stroke and aphasia. Of course, it's the day of, so I can tell what stroke and aphasia looks like, but I know that there are all kinds of different types of aphasia. So it's not like I can understand all the different types, but just seeing enough is enough to know. And me being one who'd gone through it and and got better. The fact that I was there, then the family knew that this guy called the Johnny Appleseed of aphasia recovery and a stroke educator, obviously they let me come, and I got to meet the person. He didn't know who I was and didn't even care. He was what I was like before. So I couldn't even attempt to communicate with him other than holding his hand. But then talked to the family, were there. In all cases, they were all spouses and women. And they were somewhat terrified. They just didn't know what this was all going to mean. I gave all of them my books, 1, 2, or 3 before I had number 4 done. Gave them all a copy and said, I know, again, me not being in MD or SLP, so I couldn't tell the severity of this person's case going forward. But you can get a feel after seeing thousands of them. And I said, the brain and the body is an amazing device, definitely. I know that this is terrifying. I know there's going to be a lot of crying, but the more you can understand what I'm here to tell you is that you will get better. I know it takes a long time. I know that it might get to where you want to be, depending on all these other deficits. But the truth is that the brain is built for this. It is built to repair. It is built because of this thing called plasticity. You might not know about this for a long, long time, but it is built that way. The cells that were destroyed take with them all of these things, not that I could explain it to them then, but they will take those cells and they're gone and they're never coming back. The amazing thing is that the cells that are still with him will now regrow more dendrites and synapses. I didn't use those words with people never seen it before, but they can grow more brain matter such that, again, the learning field, the synaptic field, again, wouldn't use those words either, but basically letting them understand how I got better from somebody who could not read, write, or speak well. Now I can express. That only means is that this black box, you know, here I am, all this activity comes in, it happens to grow based on the remaining cells. There's a new article coming out actually of another metaphor of, I'll come back to that, but basically they grow more dendrites and synapses with the remaining cells and eventually contribute to the learning field such that based on habit, stimuli, a lot of other things that allowed me to speak when I couldn't speak before. That's really all they need at the very beginning. And I'm usually there for 5 to 10 minutes and I'm gone. But they leave knowing, okay, this is one person got better. And that means that we can get better. We'll figure this out. And by then they'll begin to understand what figuring it out starts to look like. But that's the way you have to do it. And you really do need to send people like us in there every day, because like me, my wife, not a single person with aphasia, zero, nothing. We had no idea. And again, I'm not faulting. I think the system, the policies at hospitals and the healthcare community really have to build new systems that allow, even if it's just bringing in one person for 5 minutes to say, I lost my language. I'm here to tell you I got it back. Here's my number. Call me. And they do call me. You know, typically they become friends. But yeah, that's how I would do it every time. Every time.
That's incredible. I can only imagine how much that means to the person and especially the family, if it's the day of or the day after a stroke, to see somebody who has gone through what their loved one just went through. And
it's true. Yeah, I even to ask my wife today, yeah, I can't even imagine, because I am sure that she went home thinking she has no idea other than looking online, but there was nobody else who could actually talk out loud and say, it happened to me. And I'm here to tell you, you know. So yeah, yeah, the brain is an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, you have to share that, because otherwise they have, like I used to think, it's just a lump that sits up there. I have really no idea how it works.
Oh, wow. Oh, Stroke Educator. This is what stroke survivors need. Yeah.
We just kind of keep working on it.
You don't think about it until you have it.
That's the case.
Yeah.
I was an engineer for 20 years. I didn't know anything about the brain.
Yeah.
You know.
And you wouldn't until, you know, it happens to you. Same with you know, people who after a stroke or whatever have difficulty swallowing. They never really thought about the fact of how to swallow, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't think about these things until it's gone or there's an injury of some kind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I think this is so important because I think there's a lot more people who have aphasia out there after a stroke or other, any kind of brain injury, that people just don't know. They don't know what it's called. They don't know what's going on. They just know that their friend now has a hard time talking or understanding.
That is true.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, tell everybody how they can find your books, find you.
Yeah, my name, you usually can find it that way, just Tom Broussard or Thomas Broussard. My website is strokeeducator.com, strokeeducator.com. You can go to Facebook and look up either Thomas Broussard or Stroke Educator. You can see it on Facebook, LinkedIn, same thing, and Twitter these days. Not that I can do a whole lot of twittering, but at least you can see me that way. You can get to my books through Amazon or go to my website. All four are there. They're linked, so you can go right to Amazon and buy them there. I do have some that are autographed that I have to ship from here. So you can actually send me emails and say, hey, we want one that's autographed, and you can buy that from me and I'll ship it to you that way too. Yeah. And then of course you can go online, you can see, this is my third year of one or two articles a month on my website. They're all called newsletters. There's a page there, so you get to see all of them there too as PDFs, and they're also very helpful. Then I transmit new articles once or twice a month with the video that goes with them on YouTube. I don't know if I mentioned YouTube, but that's another one with Stroke Educator. So there's lots of ways to get to it, but it still isn't enough by more than a half. 6 to 7% of the country know about aphasia awareness. That means that most of that are people that have a stroke, their family has a stroke or aphasia, they're in the clinician world, they're in the aphasia world. They're just, nobody else knows much about aphasia outside of that, including hospitals, unfortunately. So many hospitals, I did studies in Florida, you can put in their search box and put in aphasia. Believe it or not, it will actually come out and say, sorry, we don't know what that is. Hospital, a stroke center hospital, aphasia, sorry, don't know what that is. Go to the American Hospital Association, great people, you put in stroke, you will see 150 hits. You put in aphasia, you'll get one. I do that because I check it all the time. You'll get one, and it won't have a whole lot to do with aphasia. The American Hospital Association. Do you think much is getting out to the public about aphasia when all of the capacity to educate the country through those things, it just doesn't work because they're not even using that lexicon. So, you know, the couple thousand people I've been talking to, you know, that's not enough. We need to get to millions. So we are actually just starting. We're still working on it at the National Aphasia Association, creating a new committee. And we need to get hundreds and then literally thousands of people, not unlike yourself, Heather, who are interested in helping, and then take that next step. And we'll be talking about that in terms of how do we get to the local communities and go to starting with first responders, fire, police, but then education, healthcare, nonprofits, because every single one in our communities have both the younger and older components of the population. Well, all the olders know more about stroke and aphasia as you get older. The youngers know nothing about how to even deal with the olders who do have stroke and aphasia. Why not educate the entire population so that when you walk into stores, and we still had our card in Boston, we called it our worry card. You walk in there and don't even know how to order your food. I had at least my card as best I could because I was pointing, and finally 2 times I had to give my card. And you could see, my name is Tom Broussard. I cannot read, write, or speak well. Please help me. Words to that effect. And both times they took me aside, they helped, they did everything they could with the meal I needed. But again, why not have the Chambers of Commerce, as an example, have just presentations like me? We'll have materials too, but we need to get into the hundreds of millions. This needs to be part of the wider public and the public consciousness about aphasia and stroke, not unlike HIV and AIDS, when that went on for years without the public knowing any idea about what was happening around them. Same thing with aphasia and, of course, plasticity, which is the foundation for all learning. And now you need to be get into schools where 3rd graders know about photosynthesis, right? Converting light into green leaves. We need to teach 3rd graders about plasticity, converting thought and cognitive activity into brain matter, neuromatter. It does this some conversion ethic, just converting from one to another, and add plasticity as part of the curriculum for 3rd graders. So for their whole life, they go forward going, oh, I understand how these things work, using metaphors with a new appreciation for how that metaphor can work when it comes to the brain and how it works and repairs itself. All of those things. We have 330 million people in the United States, and here's you and me. We need a whole lot more making this work.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Yes, I love it.
I'll sign you up.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Me too.
Wow. Okay. Well, Tom, is there anything else you want to add that we didn't get to today?
You got a couple hours?
Yeah. Well, definitely people need to go check out your YouTube channel, Stroke Educator, your website, your books, everything.
Yes, exactly. You can basically continue to tell people that that I am looking for committee members, and it could be some amorphous committee, committee of 1,000 to, like yourself, Heather. I mean, you've gone so far as to want to do this interview, which is wonderful for me, but I do appreciate it a lot. And that really means that you're going to continue to do this for no good reason other than you're incredibly helpful and interested in making this happen. So the fact that there's 1 like you, there are 10 like you, there's 1,000 like you. You're 1 in California. I know a couple people there, but I haven't talked to anybody in California about my work at all. So when I talk about this amorphous committee, really it's very interesting that we all get connected as we now are, and now we can set up a committee. You and I talk like this. You're going to say, hey, Tom, I got my 5 friends here in California, in my neighborhood or whatever. Let's have a Zoom. Let's talk about this. How can we help with this? And I'm writing some examples of what I'm doing here. I'm going to show them with everybody, share them with everybody as examples. We could do that. You and I and your group and larger groups and more. Then pretty soon we'll have a lot more people who every day, and it's not like me or anybody else is saying, okay, you must do this. No, I have to find the people that are interested the way some of us are, some of them aren't. But when you and I do what we do and explain to others who really don't know anything about aphasia, they find, oh, you mean somebody loses their language and they got it back? Tell me more. Right? Because people are interested, humans are interested in understanding when something terrible like this happens and you get better. They want to know what the it is that makes it happen from there to here, because they realize, oh, they have a brain too, and it too can need it later. Why don't I learn more about it now? So yes, that's what I mean, this amorphous committee, of which there's now you and me. Right? Yes.
Yes. We're here. Oh, awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Tom, and
Thank you.
this will
Me too.
definitely not be the last time. We will keep going.
Absolutely. I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we will continue to do it. As I say, it's what I do all the time. I am sure this is what you do all the time. It wouldn't happen any other way. So I do appreciate that. And that'll be a lot of fun to continue to work with you.
Awesome.